That we are live. This is Foreign and Domestic episode 19. Almost at the 20th episode. Who'd have thought it? Two kids when we began this. Just trying to get some time time away from the fam. So it is coming up on 8 o'clock here. Anybody tuning in, as always, appreciate you. We'll let you all straggle in there, those who are going to stay. Welcome. Like I said, episode 19. I am Patter Cleary. This is my co-host, Ramon Mile, over there. Everything sound good on that end, Ramon?
I'm hearing a little bit of echo. Hold on, you keep carrying. I got you.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right, I'm going to keep going. It's probably something with the mic on the thing, but it's not. Well, let's see. It's been a hectic week.
We're golden. We're good.
It's those of you who are following politics, or at least TV politics, we've had a few things pop up that optically the press love, like the G7 summit over in London.
Well, I think it was in it wasn't in London this year.
I mean, excuse me, it was in Great Britain though, right?
No, I think it was in I can't remember what country it was in. It was in like Belgium or something this year.
Oh,
or one of those like little itty bitty countries over there.
Jeez.
I can't remember. I think it was in Canard. That was the name of the town. I don't know what country that's in. To be honest, we can do a quick Google search. But...
Oh yeah, the 47th. Yeah, it was in Carbis Bay in the United Kingdom.
Really? I read it was in Canard. Maybe I was.
Cornwall.
You know what? Maybe they were.
It was in Cornwall.
Maybe they were referring to the last year's or something. I know they switched the location.
You had me sweating there. Sounded like an asshole.
Sorry,
right
bro.
off the bat.
My bad. It's like, hey, yeah, I probably misread it. My bad. I didn't mean to throw you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say much about it other than that. You know, at the end of the day, a lot of that is, you know, and it's necessary because of the nature of politics to have leaders stand next to each other and, you know, take all those photo ops and, you know, go into meetings and talk about this, that, and the other thing. But, I mean, we all know how communication works. If any of these people wanted to hash out deals, you know, they'd get on the phone with the leaders. The majority of what they're talking about is how can economically one country help the other? How can you know, we work together to, you know, drive down the price of this, which is all valid stuff. But right. I think the weight of the G7 now, I believe the 7 countries themselves combined account for, I think, just under 40% of global economics. So they're no longer like, you know, they used to be far more. I think you could have, I've heard people saying you could probably just have a China and US summit, and that would be sufficient for the things that they end up actually talking about.
Right.
There was some funny stuff that went down there. Obviously, you had Biden meeting Putin, and Biden lost his temper on Caitlin Collins from CNN. Did you see that?
Oh, did he? No, you said nothing happened. I didn't watch it. What
you know,
happened?
I can't blame. Like, obviously, we don't fawn over Joe Biden, but
yeah.
You know, I'm paraphrasing here, but she kind of misquoted him in saying that, like, how can you think that, you know, Putin is going to be anybody else but Putin? You know, even after you met him and you think things are going to happen. And he just kind of chastised her. But he came back and apologized.
Old cranky Joe.
Yeah. He acted like a really get off my lawn type guy.
Yo, I'm telling you, that's how he won, bro. I don't know why they keep trying to keep him shackled up.
But one of the funniest dynamics, though, of it was that, like, now that it's gone, you know, right-wing media are saying, well, shit, that was with the weakest we've ever looked. Whereas, like, everybody else is kind of like, that was fine. There was no major gaffes.
Yeah, bro, the Italian president literally was like, oh, now that America's back to normal.
I know. And
the weakest we've looked. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that Biden did a bad job, because everybody holds their breath a little bit when Joe gets kind of brought out, just because he's liable to, and he will become more and more liable every time over these next 3 years. But yeah, that was the G7.
Wait, so hold on. I have a little tidbit. I lied to you earlier. I did do a little bit of reading. Like, again, folks, you know me. What's the political analysis? Just like Patter said, it's all just posturing. These people just go up and have all their prepared statements and all of that stuff. The only thing I did glean from it that I think has some meaning is obviously anyone who's read the quotes of what Joe Biden, obviously China was very much center stage, as they that's
typically
rare.
are
Usually well it's rare in the way that America like couched their language. They were much more aggressive. Normally the G7 talks about China pretty neutrally and just about an economic threat.
Sure.
Biden and other people who spoke that were representing America there certainly tried to take the posture that China is like advancing militarily. They tried to drop in some nuggets, but I think the interesting thing is Angela Merkel had some quotes. I just did it again.
Wow.
Merkel.
That's her name, Angela Merkel.
Oh, that is her last name. Remember when I got her name wrong the one time? I called what's her name? The Prince Harry's.
Oh yeah, Meghan Merkel.
Yeah, Meghan Merkel. But no, Angela Merkel came out and actually like poured some water on it a little bit with a quote that she said where she was like, yeah, I'm not really like that concerned about China. We just need to like pay more attention than usual. So her and I can't remember what country's leader said it too, but someone else echoed something very similar to that. So it's interesting to see how, okay, even though America's clearly trying to like make this pivot, Democrats trying to join in with the right wing in like, China alarmism, and very much some European leaders not willing to engage and follow suit. I think that is somewhat of a bellwether because obviously if you look at the breakdowns of Chinese investment around the world, China actually is quite invested in European infrastructure at this point. Now, not necessarily in like Italy and Great Britain and Germany, because they're powerhouses in and of themselves. They don't need to submit to that type of bribery, essentially, because they don't need the money. But there are a significant number of EU countries that do have Chinese investment. For example, China owns a port in Greece, one of their major ports now. I didn't know that.
I don't know if I've spoke to you about it before, and you actually reminded me of a big part of the G7 is China has for the last decade or so been building the not the Silk Road. What is it? Something road.
It's their Marshall Plan.
Yeah. It's like Iron Road or fuck, I can't even think of it now. But basically,
whatever it's called, it's whatever we call it. Probably.
Yeah. But they've been. It's a smart idea. They were going to places like in Montenegro and hiring workers from there and building ways to move and assimilate Chinese goods into their pockets, basically. But I know that you reminded me that yes, I think other countries have been looking to do something similar, and with the EU kind of coming off the back of what happened with Brexit, there's a need for that a little bit, I guess, from a competitive standpoint. That was another thing as well that they talked about. Joe Biden was asked about, the Northern Ireland issues that were going on, and in typical Joe, the plastic paddy form, he kind of touted his Irishness while he spoke about how you want Ireland to have the rub of the green, so to speak, with the negotiations.
Right. So. I think just on like a real quick, just like a zoomed out level, last thing I'll say on this topic is I think it's a good thing. American hegemony we've all seen what that's done around the world as far as like military incursions and things like that. I don't like me personally. I think it's a good thing. I think America, we discussed it previously on the podcast. Like, there's a lot of Americans, especially people who have their hands on the lever of power, who don't want to admit that we're at the end of that cycle. Where America is no longer going to be the world leader, and that's just a fact. Donald Trump just accelerated that. Okay, there's not as much as people want to beat the drums for war with China. That's not realistic. Like, they're like, oh, China's now the second leading military force in the world, and it's like, okay, but we still like triple their nukes. Like, there's all these other ways where it's like America is still wildly outspending them on military. In my opinion, it would actually be a good thing for a better level of world peace if over the long term China does eat in somewhat into American hegemony. And the reason I say that is because America and China are already extremely codependent in their own trading.
Yep.
So if you have more countries become intertwined with China, that means America has less allies to lean on in the European Union to take these similar aggressive stances, and that leaves them with, okay, all we can do is just bark from the sideline.
Right.
That's a good thing, okay, folks? That's a good thing, in my opinion, when you want to talk about the chance of like a hot war with China anytime in the next 30, 40 years.
Yep.
The more they envelop themselves into the rest of the world's economy, as much as people who run industry and business folks around the world don't like it because, yeah, I'll be honest, China doesn't play fair. It's still good from a foreign policy perspective for us, for people who like want to be safe and not be at war.
Yeah.
I think that's a great thing.
Right.
And, America just doesn't want to share the ball. And honestly, there's nothing you can do about it. China can just drop bread on anyone they want at any time, and there isn't really anything we can do to stop them.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So that was the spectacle of the G7. Typically, at the G7 and a lot of those international political summits, there's normally a strong protesting group. I didn't see any of that. That was something that you normally see. The people taken to the streets, different labor stuff, and I didn't see any of that, interestingly enough. So before we get into the main topic, and what we're going to focus on this episode is, it's 50 years since the famous Nixon speech, the war on drugs, where he called it public enemy number one. And for those of you who know, that kind of signaled the mass incarceration getting turned up, and the so-called war on drugs, disproportionately focusing on certain neighborhoods, certain people, certain groups of people. But yeah, before we get into that, Ramon, do you have any other things you want to chat about before we?
Yeah, the last thing, because I know we're already 20 minutes in here, so I'll keep it short. I did want to mention, everybody just go look into it. And we're not going to pick it up as a quick hit, but New York did drop a bunch of COVID restrictions recently.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was yesterday. Or no, I'm sorry, it was it doesn't matter. Last day or so.
Mm-hmm.
Cuomo announced, and Gavin Newsom did. They both did in tandem on the same day. They released a bunch of the restrictions that they'd put in place, 6-foot restrictions in restaurants, things like that. Go look it up. A lot of relevant things for things you may be planning to do in the future. Mm-hmm. And some restrictions still stay in place around like public facilities, commercial areas, things like that. But the quick hit I do want to spend a little bit of time on, because I think it's something good to talk about that can hold a lot of weight for the future, is there recently, I believe it was on Wednesday, 13 progressive groups publicly called on Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer to step down from the court to let President Joe Biden confirm his successor while Democrats control the Senate. Okay, so obviously, it doesn't really need to be said if anybody's been following the Supreme Court picks for the last, 6 years now. This is extremely important because, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died unexpectedly. Trump filled that seat in the last minute. Well, literally, I believe, I'm forgetting the House member that he tweeted it the other day, and I didn't know this. He filled that seat literally while people were voting, which is crazy because that was the Republicans' whole logic around the Merrick Garland, Obama not getting to appoint him, was that, he's in his lame duck year. And I believe that was almost a full year prior to the election that Mitch McConnell did not allow that vote to happen. Mm-hmm. So the reason this is important, folks, is the court is already at a wild imbalance. Trump already put in 2 very young Supreme Court justices. This gentleman, Stephen Breyer, was appointed by Bill Clinton back in like 95 or something like that. He's already in his 80s. Okay. So now he's responded to this ad that these 13 progressive groups put forward, calling on him to step down, with basically saying, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact quote here, where he's like, no, I don't feel that any judge, regardless of the Supreme Court or not, should be, dependent or should be responding to his party's political issues around whether someone should step down or not. He thinks that they should be fully independent.
Yeah.
And like I was just telling Patter offline, I fully agree with that. But the whole point of this pressure campaign, folks, is to get Biden to lean on this guy, to get people in the Democratic Party to lean on this guy to step down. And it's not an unfair thing. I mean, I get that the way that people see this is like, oh, well, what do you mean? Like, we don't want our judges to be involved in politics. It's too late. That's not the case. Newsflash. That's hasn't been the case for decades now. If the Republicans play this way, if they're going to bring the gun to the knife fight, then you got to go get a gun.
Mm-hmm.
So, you got to lean on this guy. Step down. You're in your 80s. Biden's only going to be president for Biden might die in the who knows? You know what I mean? Let's go. Let's go. I'm glad that someone's getting the wheels spinning on things like this, because at the very least, this is going to put, even if nothing comes of it right now, even this year, it's going to leave that little worm in the ear of people who do these types of judicial watches that understand, what the ages of some of these justices are.
I'm going to say something that is kind of, tremendous judge, tremendous career. But if that same line of thinking was there for someone like an RBG who, was going through intensive, cancer treatment, it's funny how that, even though Stephen Breyer is in good health, I mean, they just upheld the ACA yesterday. There was a couple of different Supreme Court rulings. Might be controversial to say, but maybe this is the type of thing that RBG should have stepped aside and then,
Oh, for sure.
So isn't it funny though? Like, she's more of an iconic class type of.
Well, first of all, she was a woman. So with the current, like how our dialogue works, how our dialectic goes right now, that would have been received poorly, and no Democratic strategist would have even allowed the person they work for to even whisper something like that in the media. First of all, so that's the point A, and then point B is, like you said, she was iconic. She was. It's the same way you must not utter anything ill of Obama. It's the same concept.
I think that's going by the wayside, though. I think that's only with your speech.
Well, Obama's not dead. That's the difference. You know what I mean?
True.
Like, I think that this is, people are now. It's been a while since she died, and people learned the lesson. It was case in point. Like, hey, we should probably start doing what Republicans do, which is you scheme behind the scenes, offer this guy some job somewhere at, or not even offer him, but just give him a whiff of it and be like, hey, we're going to take care of you. Just step down. We got to make sure we get a young guy in here. Lean on him a little bit. What's the point of being the most powerful person on the face of the planet if you're not going to lean on people?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the point? And be assured he is leaning on people about things he cares about. They just don't see this the same way that we do.
Right, and that's the glean has kind of gone off the Supreme Court. Obviously, it's a functional part of the democracy, and it needs to be seen as that way. I think for America to truly feel like it is. But after all the discussions and the show confirmations with like Gorsuch, he wasn't. What's the other guy's name?
Brett
Kavanaugh. Yeah. I think, again, the Supreme Court now is a proper reflection of how the discourse is as well at the moment, for sure. But that's something to look at. And you're right in saying that obviously he seems like he's in good health, but just having the dialogue going and having a movement behind, at least start to think about it. And if he truly is a judge who wants to keep up the impartiality of the role in itself, and forever what conservatives and liberals say is that, like, look at the balance of the court, right? What is it at the moment? It's like, what is it?
I believe it's 5-4 or something like that.
5-4. So yeah.
Or wait, no, I'm sorry. It's not. No, it's 9-4, isn't it? Or,
no.
What is it? I can't remember what it is. It's out of whack. There's 3 more Republicans than there are
conservatives. Yeah,
than there are conservatives than Democrat. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the fact that it's been spoken about, and now you said there's so many progressives behind it. I think we touched on this, at a previous episode, and how there was murmurs of it back when, I think at the same time they were talking about Dianne Feinstein stepping aside as well. And just one more quick hit before we get into the main. I kind of forgot about this, but I wanted to get your take on it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about...
It's 6-3, by the way.
6-3?
Yeah.
What do you think about Manchin's proposal for voting that he came out with this week? That he's got the backing of... it sounds like he's after moving the needle with all of the Democrats. Obviously, McConnell already came out and said, none of this is going to happen. Let me pull up the details on what was in it. I don't know if you know it offhand.
No, I don't know Joe Biden. Holy shit! I don't know President Joe Manchin's and I'm saying that on purpose, like cynically, because that's how he sees himself now. He's basically the president of the United States. He gets to decide what is happening and what's not. Here, while you're looking that up, I would also like to drop in and mention that if anyone hasn't read the article from The Intercept where they actually got someone leaked a Skype interview that he had with a bunch of billionaire donors where he was basically telling them like, hey, you need to help me donate money to these Republicans to flip them to help me vote for this because I have leftists on my ass. Oh yeah, it was so complicated. I didn't want to bring it up as a quick hit. I mean, it's like literally a whole thing in and of itself, but extreme corruption. We'll look it up. Check it out on The Intercept. They do great work there, folks.
So, yeah.
But yeah, no, I didn't look into it because as soon as I saw like, Clyburn was like, oh, this is great. I was like, yeah, I don't care.
Well,
if they go ahead, do your half measure, whatever you're about to do.
No, I think it's positive because at least it further puts pressure on him that which Republicans already, Mitch McConnell came out and said, yeah, we're not going to go for any of this. So the Senate negotiations for his bill would be around automatic voter registration. Great, is needed. Making Election Day a holiday. Great, it's needed. Mandating at least 15 days of early voting for federal elections. Great. And banning partisan gerrymandering.
That's real loose language right there.
Well, I mean, it goes into more detail, but we don't want to have it as a main. But it's supported. Chuck Schumer is already greasing the wheels to get this going. Stacey Abrams was on every news talk show yesterday saying that she likes it, so much so that part of what the Republican pushback is like, we're just going to call this the Stacey Abrams bill.
Right.
So
they want to make her face the face of it.
And it's positive.
No, I think so. You want my take? I'll give you my take.
And we know he's a POS, but...
Yeah, so here's my issue with it. Just from, I saw the overview of what was in it, and I saw a couple subheads, read a paragraph, but I didn't go in deep. But the big thing that I saw a bunch of people criticizing about it was the fact that it doesn't do anything there isn't any language in what he's put forward that would make illegal the things that a lot of the Republican state houses have put forward. So as much as you're going to have automatic voter registration, great. That should have been a thing like 50 years ago. There's a bunch of good stuff in there, don't get me wrong, but the problem is a lot of the ills that Republicans have jammed through their state houses in the last few months will remain untouched. And not to mention the fact that when you talk about, like, for example, a 15-day, like you're saying, allowance for early voting, a lot of these things that are in that are going to be Supreme Court fights that will probably be lost. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying it is a good step forward, but what I'm saying is if you're going to put in federal voter legislation, you need to do it in a way that's going to nullify a lot of this shit that they've done in the states. And this tiptoes around a lot of it. So
yeah,
I will take the holiday for sure. If they pass this, it's a great thing. Again, my only problem with it, again, like on the political strategy framing of it, is we continue to allow this man, who is the thorn in our side, he is the roadblock. Now he's flipping the media coverage on himself as if he's savior, and that's not the case. Now, what everyone needs to remember is, just like McConnell said, this ain't flying. They ain't going to get no Republicans. Right. And if they do, it's probably only going to be 5 or 6, just like on every other thing that they've tried.
They need to get 10.
So if we're going to use reconciliation on this, why didn't we, again, it begs the question, why didn't we do this for anything else?
Yeah.
Like we literally had to drag Manchin kicking and screaming, and now he's trying to flip the optics as if like, oh, I've been doing all this work on the side with my op-eds and disagreeing with every Democrat in the Senate.
Well, we also said that We also said that he's void of actually the feeling of the people at this point, because if he did, he would have, already talked about our getting rid of the filibuster. But I think this at least, gives an opportunity for the heat to continue to, fall on him as he's, batted away the filibuster every single time. If he can't get those 10 votes, then that's another glaring reason why they need to get rid of it. But like we've talked about, time is ticking, and the stall the ball game from, from the Republicans is working. Mitch McConnell has already said no. So try get your 10 votes. I don't know if you can. Good luck.
All I'm trying to say is all you Joe Biden stands out there, like the people who like went and campaigned for him, you voted for him, like in the primary, you were all about him. Who's president? Is it Joe Manchin or is it Joe Biden? Because all I see is President Joe Manchin. All I see is his face on every cover of every article that talks about the Senate being an issue. I don't see Joe Biden talking on anyone. And again, this is the issue that I have with it, because it's all going through him.
Yeah.
It's all going through him. Who's the leader of the Senate? Chuck Schumer?
Right.
Like, all these people who want to take a back seat and let this man steer everything. I have a problem with one of the most conservative blue dog people that's ever exist. Like,
steering the ship.
Steering the ship. With this is just bad on its face. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And if it goes through, cool and great, that's fine. If this is what triggers them to start using, actually start building towards, and I believe that Schumer did acknowledge this in a bunch of articles that I did read leading up to it, where they already started putting together all of the legislative language that they need to for this to be a reconciliation thing. That's fine and that's great. But again, it's really frustrating that it's like, wow, you guys, you let this guy lead you by the nose for months. Like, again, what was the political strategy of all that from his angle? Like, in my opinion, like I said, he's doing it for his own gain. Yeah. He's not doing it from like any honest place of bipartisanship or any of that, because at the end of the day, Mitch McConnell's telling you what the deal is, folks. Like, why are you believing Joe Manchin about, I got 6 people. You don't got 6 people. Schumer got 6 people. You didn't do that. Like, he keeps trying to frame it all in a way so you all stop hating him.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, he deserves your hate.
I don't think he cares, though. I don't think he cares.
Because we wouldn't even be in this place if him and Kirsten Sinema weren't fucking around.
Yep.
We would have did reconciliation 2 months ago.
And for fear,
he literally set the house on fire, and he's bringing the fire truck and being like, "Oh, how benevolent am I? Oh, look at me. Aren't I great?" No, you set it on fire, bro. This shit would have been a done issue months ago. That's all I'm saying. Let's keep it real. That's all I'm saying.
Right, and fear will take up the whole episode talking about Joe Manchin again. I just thought it was interesting. And, it's garnering supports, and, it's pushing the needle. It's not pushing it as fast as we'd like, but I think ultimately it puts more pressure then on the filibuster. And I
blame you for that, because you snuck that on.
Yeah,
me.
I didn't even talk to you about that in pre-production.
We promised we were going to stop talking about this shit, and you did it, bro.
All right, so one thing I did want to talk about, let's get right into it, because this is something that I've noticed and I've talked about for quite a while. Can you hear me all right, by the way? Do I sound good in this?
Sound
all
great.
Right, voice of an angel. So, like I mentioned in the opening, Richard Nixon on June 17th, 1971, if anybody hasn't seen it, that's where, he got in front of the mic and declared, public enemy number 1, war on drugs. We've seen kind of what that means on a global level. They went after people like Escobar. It was all part of that, and kind of the influx of drugs was all as well contributed, in my opinion, to the fact that there was a war on it. You just have to look at instances like Prohibition. Again, that wasn't the stopping of what was going on. It was just making it more underground, more nefarious. More shit happened. More people got organized.
More profitable.
Yeah. Again, that's all part of it. And I think some of the most severe policies implemented during the war on drugs are being scaled back or at least scrapped. You have to just look at kind of what we've seen happen with marijuana. We've also seen, globally, countries' reactions to dealing with drug addiction and kind of the issues that are around it. And I'll get back to that, but just kind of my take on a lot of it is, looking at America's war on drugs, I think it helped to give America now, obviously standing alone as the most incarcerated country in the world. There's just under 50% of all people locked up in American prisons right now are there on drug-related offenses. And you think of, on its face, you think of that, oh shit, that's a lot of people locked up for drugs. And you think of, obviously, the instances of what made them get locked up, but you don't really think of the toll that has on everybody who knows, people who've gone to prison. I don't need to spell it out for everyone. It's not just what we're seeing from the stats on all this. It's the impact that it has for, the communities. That's number one, I think.
The human cost.
Yeah, the human cost. In saying that, we're seeing some of kind of the scaling back on some of the stuff, but the structures that are there and the architecture is all intact still for the war on drugs. Federal spending on drugs, much of that preventative stuff, the stopping of transporting and all that is expected to hit $37 billion just this year. Now, we also know that the drug war was, ineffective, and I'll quote Attorney General Letitia James here in a statement to NPR. She said, "Over the last 50 years, we've unfortunately seen the war on drugs be used as an excuse to declare war on people of color, on poor Americans, and so many other marginalized groups." And I think that kind of sums up what the toll of it is, right? You see the militarization of police. Again, that adds another facet to the damage it can do. I think when these are disproportionately affecting, poor communities, black and brown communities, that relationship with the police is obviously going to continue to break down and break down and break down when you have, 17 states, I believe, including red-leaning states like Alaska, Montana, and DC have rolled back legislation on marijuana. And I think one place, and I'll let you speak after this because I'm kind of just listing off stuff that I've noticed.
You're killing
Oregon, and some people may have be familiar with this. Last November, they were the first state to decriminalize small quantities of all drugs, and that's heroin, methamphetamines, you name it. And the greatest parallel that we know and we kind of see with some of those more illicit drugs is Portugal. Now, Portugal in 2001, they took a more health-centered approach to their drug policy. And, it was something that, sent off alarm bells for a lot of people because to take a step back, we talk about bipartisanship. Obviously Richard Nixon came in with the war on drugs, but that shit was backed up by Democratic and Republican administrations. They were in lockstep. You got to think of the crime bill on how that put
Joe Biden.
Yeah, Joe Biden. The crime bill that put steroids into the war on drugs. Don't get it twisted. This isn't a fucking single party issue at all. But like I was saying, in 2001, Portugal came in with this more health-centered drug policy approach. They stopped treating these people as criminals first and started looking at the reasons why and the actual, ways to rehabilitate and not just incarcerate. So drug-related deaths fell after the reform of Portugal's first drug policy and have remained below the EU average since 2001. And that's incredible. Let's just fucking think about that. The reasons that they went and took this type of policy, they had a proper seismic shift in the way they approach these things, and kind of went out on an island as a nation to do this. Kind of went out on their own and say, okay, how can we fucking fix this? The proportion of the prison population sentenced for drug offenses has fallen from 40% to 15%. Now, I just listed off a stat to you about, what was it? Almost 50% of all people incarcerated in the most incarcerated country in the world are for drug offenses. that's a big percentage shift that we're seeing here. And we're not talking about a small sample size. We're talking about 20 years here. That's a good enough data set for you to be able to make these conclusions and have data to back it up. Rates of drug use have remained consistently below the EU average. So, I'd mentioned that, drug-related deaths fell, drug use fell too. Figure that, Portugal has gone from accounting for over 50% of yearly HIV diagnosis linked to injecting drug use in the EU to just 1.7%.
Yeah, I saw that. That was incredible.
So, I have some more stuff to talk about, but I guess I just wanted to get that out there initially to kind of compare and contrast one policy to the other. I named off kind of prison effects of it, as well as kind of obviously the health effects. But I guess as we look 50 years back from when Reagan announced it, and we see the toll, and we continue to see it. It's not that the war on drugs is quote unquote over,
No.
but I think the landscape as it looks now, I think people are seeing that with the opioid crisis. Last year was a record for the amount of overdoses, and opioids is kind of a different one flipped into the mix because. Crack and heroin was ones that, like I said, disproportionately affected black and brown neighborhoods. And it was a way of, really racially continue to persecute people because that was an easy, cheap drug that they could spread around neighborhoods and then in turn go in and crack skulls and put people in prison. And again, a form of, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary, what was it, the 18th Amendment or whatever, where it was talking about how it's legal to have slaves in not so many words. Slavery is legal under the 18th Amendment because prisoners can do work for free. And that was a way, to do that. But yeah, I thought this was an important topic to have as a main, just because outside of us talking about prisons and the individual, doing something wrong, going to prison, I think societally and how people view those issues are not, people just don't pick up drugs and become an addict because they think it's fun. Right. There's circumstances that turn people to drugs, and there's a wide range of them, but issues like poverty, issues like not feeling secure in, different aspects of your life. And I rattled off the amount of money that's spent on dealing with the war on drugs. Can you imagine using that same money to, go into communities and helping, making sure that, health services are right, educational services are right. And I think Portugal is a great contrast to that because it shows that it can be done. We're not dealing with, a small data set. We're dealing with real numbers, real people, and a real positive from this different approach than a quote-unquote war on drugs.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very nice. So I think this topic is actually very important. It hadn't even crossed my radar until you sent me, you spoke about it, sent me the article. But I think it is significant, to celebrate the bicentennial, not celebrate, but observe and analyze the bicentennial of this, when it was announced. Nixon announced it. Because, for this reason, I always try to, when we look back through political history in America, I think it's very important to understand the themes of what the government was trying to frame things as. And, prior to this point, and I argue this is a big reason why this pivot was made. And, I think this is a somewhat original thought on my point. I haven't really heard anyone say it, but I think it makes sense. There's a clear break, right, from when, mid-World War II, when American foreign policy was sort of melding with the creation of a new security state in America, right? And a lot of what the messaging coming from the government was of what they were telling Americans was important. You had bomb shelters. People were being focused on like doom drilling. Right. Everything was very anti-communist based for a long time in America. That started waning going into the 70s, and they pivoted directly to this. And I think it's important to understand these different these different points of bifurcation,
and
that
they pivoted
American,
directly to this.
and I think it's important essentially because that's what this is, folks. That's what we're talking about here. For better or for worse, whether you want to call it good propaganda or bad, it is propaganda because it's the thing that the government centered around delivering and messaging on as a whole. It wasn't just one party. Right, so the war on drugs continued for a long time, and then the war on terror came. But there's always a thing that's in the the country's trying to drill for you to keep in the front of your mind whenever you consider political issues. And the war on drugs is a hell of a one.
Yeah.
And I see you've got this quote here, and this sort of, gives credence to what some people would call what I just said, conspiratorial thinking. I'm going to eat some of your notes here, where in a 1994 interview published in Harper's Magazine, Nixon advisor John Elrickman suggested racial animus was among the motives shaping the drug war. He said, quote, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the Vietnam War or blacks, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing them both heavily, we could disrupt those communities." So again, just like how me and Patter on a previous episode went into Operation Condor, the CIA operation, and all that stuff that entailed around anti-communism in America, there was also very similar. There was statements. These people will tell you eventually, like in time, what they were doing and what their goal was. And when they tell you, believe them. It really bothers me that there's still people that exist in American politics today that talk that have the stance as if what me and Pat are saying here is like this was all intentional, like we're crazy. And now for the most part, those people are a huge minority now. But the fact that anyone can possibly say that without being laughed out of a building is a problem still. You know what I mean? Like, this was all clearly intentionally done, at its outset anyway, exactly what Elrickman said in that interview. So that's point one that I wanted to drop. Now, the second thing that I think is important to understand the framing around what was happening in the country at this time when this first was kicked off is, obviously we won't go in depth with it here, but this was also the war on drugs was a win-win situation, just like with Condor, where you had multiple CIA assets globally and CIA operations and programs that, again, it's so sprawling we can't get into it, where it was a political win for politicians to crack down on political enemies and to have something to obfuscate the obvious decline in American quality of life at that point. A lot of people forget that the middle class, this is right where it started shrinking, right here, right in the early 70s. This is when the working man who used to enjoy the benefits of living in, a hyper-capitalist country that had, offered great industrial jobs, warehousing, factory work, things like that. This is right when it started clipping down. So they had a clear thing to pivot through and put in the mind's eye of all these people who were looking around wondering, why the fuck does it suck so much now? And then at the same time, all those, cloak and dagger type folks got to let their assets run drugs into the country at the same time, funding operations, enriching people here domestically that were behind a lot of this stuff. So it was a win-win. There was no way they could lose. So that's just, I'll kick it back to you. That was just, I wanted to give that little, that zoom out where I think it's important when we talk about things that run this long course over American history for people to have that framing where it's like, why did this happen? Because as much as people don't like to admit it, people like, a Bumpy Johnson during this time or, any of the big drug kingpins that existed in America, people have to understand it within this context that they were all a slave to the moment. There were things bigger than them, above them that, there were people literally just flying thousands of pounds and kilos of drugs into America on a monthly basis that worked for the government. Like, let's not forget that fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said something kind of important there in that, let's look at it from 10,000 feet view. Nixon obviously put this in motion, and we talked about, kind of the gutting of the middle class. I think Reagan really put that nail in the coffin on top of this. I think the tandem of both of those was solidified the problem with drugs or what you can have with drugs, in that when people turn to disparity, and it's not always just that. We know that fucking, Joey from the nice neighborhood can get addicted to coke too. We know that.
Right. But it's the unobserved part, and I love that you just pivoted. To
Yeah.
that, because I argue that is the main driver of what why the consumption of it was, the demand was so high.
Right.
It is the immiseration. That is exactly what
Right,
it is.
and then you pair that as well with, 1 in 6, or 1 out of every 6 person who's arrested the disproportionate amount of times that black and brown people are arrested for those same crimes. So that's how you really push down on all that policy, because you're not, drawing a straight line with it and saying everybody's the same. So that again really gave a chance to minimize certain communities with these a war on drug policy. Some other stats here I think that are important. And this was a quote from Cassandra Frederick. She heads the Drug Policy Alliance. She said, "The war on drugs is an absolute miscalculation on human behavior." And I think that's what it is. Is like, we've seen it with prohibition. People are still going to do it. And we see it with, marijuana. That the fact that it was illegal didn't stop anybody from doing it. And, usership went up and went up and went up every single year. Since 1971, the war on drugs has cost the United States an estimated $1 trillion. $1 trillion. And I'd say that's a conservative number, honestly.
For sure, it's immeasurable.
And if it is. And if you're just looking at, okay, what is that? You might be talking about maybe, the militarization of the police, all these different things.
Incarceration costs,
all of that.
Lost productivity from people in prison.
Yeah. And we're not talking about drug policy or drug treatment places either. This is probably just straight up enforcement of these policies. In 2015, the federal government spent an estimated $9.2 million every day to incarcerate people charged with drug-related offenses. That's more than $3.3 billion annually. And I think what's important to note about that, I listed off, some of the stats. I said almost 50% of people locked up are for drug-related offenses. Once you get, and we know it's not a secret, once you get into a system, when you talk about, New York's 3-strike rule, things like that, when you get locked up or get put in the system, it can then drive you into other crimes. So you could get locked up after getting out for a drug-related offense. So I'd probably argue that that number is even higher than that 50%. I think there was probably a mix in the rest of them. State governments spent $7 billion in 2015 to incarcerate individuals for drug-related offenses. North Carolina, for example, spent more than $70 million incarcerating people for drug possession. And Georgia spent $7.86 million just to lock up people of color for drug offenses. 1.6 times more than the state's budget currently for substance use treatment services. And like I said, pair that with what they did in Portugal. And we're not talking about fucking change here, like Trump change. We're talking about like real dollars that could be used to actually get to the source of why these problems are decimating communities, why they're putting a strain on, services like police, fire, and ambulance. I know that across the country now, I'm sure on every single shift, I'd imagine police in most metropolitan areas have to get called to, Narcan hits, and every single day, and we know, and it's not getting any lighter. The load, like I said, 90,000 people overdosed just last year, record. Mm-hmm. So, and that's overdose deaths, not to mention all those people who were hit with Narcan and brought back to life. Right. Now, in contrast, marijuana legalization would save about $7.7 billion per year in averted enforcement costs, and would yield an additional $6 billion in tax revenue. Again, this is not a secret. This is just fucking common sense. Super obvious. Yeah. The net total would be $13.7 billion, and you could send more than 650,000 students to public universities every year with that money. So, and again, the reason I wanted to do this topic is there's no secret. Obviously, I'm for something like free healthcare. I'm for shit like you should be able to go to school, no matter where you're growing up or how much money you have. Because if you truly care about your society, you should want them happy and educated, and that ability should be there for every single person, and it'll help your society. and case in point is somewhere like Portugal, where they shifted that. People stopped. Less people started using it, as well as the health and safety of the people went down.
Right. Well, because what you're talking about, Patter, you're in favor of positive freedoms.
Yes.
Things like you should be able to do things that your economic limitations might stop you from in a different system, where a lot of people on the right are in favor of negative freedoms. Like, oh, I should have the freedom to not participate in public health things like wearing masks. I should have the freedom to not have to register my gun or do any of these things.
Yeah.
Those are negative freedoms, things that can directly correlate to damage to public health. Okay, so I just wanted to drop that in right there, because I think that's super critical, especially when the majority of what this conversation that we're centering around here, especially when you bring Portugal into consideration, is they shifted the whole framing from a criminal justice issue to a public health one, which is the only way you should be thinking about this, because at the end of the day, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of studies that show that, why do people turn to drugs? Just like what we said earlier, it's a human problem. Right. This isn't something that's just like, oh, why are how it was framed in the past, like, why are these people, what's the word? Dysfunctional.
Right.
Why are
they more susceptible to getting involved in this? Yeah.
Yeah. Why are they not just doing what all the rest of us do and just going to their job and walking around completely sober all the time? What leads people to want to leave reality behind? I wonder what it would be. Instead of sitting down and thinking about that, it was, oh, well, they're just degenerates.
Crack skulls.
Throw them all in prison. Yeah, throw them all in prison, even though it actually costs way more to imprison someone, like we mentioned earlier, then they're no longer working, contributing productivity to the economy. Well, all these people care about so much, GDP, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's like, but then that's the thing, right? Because it fit at the time, and it still does fit perfectly into this capitalist ideal where it's like, okay, even if we imprison these people and they can't work per se, we can maybe enslave them in prison.
Right.
Or some capitalist can make money by building private prisons.
Yeah. I mean, that's at the crux of all of it. It's at the
that can be traded. It can be traded on the stock market, folks. Dividends. We can invest in prisons. And that's the real flaw at the heart of all of this, right? Is that at the end of the day, it's something that we've hit on plenty of times when we talked about the labor crisis, shortage crisis, all these other things that we've had a lot of people in control of this country for a long time that do not view humans as humans. They're just a number on a spreadsheet. How can I profit off of these people? There's a lot of people walking around this world that have this sickness, this illness, where that is the only framing that they can understand and think about other people who they don't personally know. Right. They're just other animals walking around this earth that can be corralled and put to work and sold for profit.
Right.
Okay? And that's at the heart of all of this, of what we're talking about. But yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I mean that. I just wanted to highlight all of it, and I think we talked about Chief Justice Breyer and how they're asking him to move aside, and I'd mentioned how they upheld the ACA yesterday, and that was a good win for people who are proponents of affordable healthcare. And since the ACA was enacted, public funding for healthcare and treatment for people who use drugs have gone up. So, if the allocation of resources was better spent, then we could really start, have a proper, and I think even using a word like a war on drugs, I think that's important, because such is the mentality now of quick news and quick sound bites. The words that we use carry so much more weight than the actual meaning behind a lot of them. Using words like war, and I'm not here to say don't use that word, but if it's going to be a fucking policy and something that's...
No, you're right, yeah, don't.
Yeah, because it immediately... What it should be is... It shouldn't be a war. It shouldn't be militarized. I think there's a fetishization with a lot of policing and what needs to be done judicially to people in drugs or with drugs.
Right.
And it's frustrating. Only by the grace of God that we're we're all not in a position where we have to battle those demons every single day.
Right.
And when you talk about these communities, even before the war on drugs, that were minimized and fucking ostracized and marginalized, then, you know, on top of that, it's like this is literally generations of people, generations of communities that have been decimated by these policies. And I think looking back, like I said, there's been some movements towards, you know, loosening now. I talked about Oregon. We talked about obviously what we're seeing with the legalization of marijuana in a lot of states, and you know, at the very minimum, decriminalization of it. Mm-hmm. What needs to happen with all of that, if it does get federally legalized, is let's start taking some time off those people, or you know, that have been locked up for marijuana-related offenses. I mean, we've heard stories over and over again. There's people in jail for 20, 30, 40 years on mandatory minimums for having a certain amount of drugs, even a certain amount of weed with them. Yep. And it, like I said, it's just looking back, when I started reading that it was the 50-year anniversary, I'm like, okay, 50 years is a healthy amount of time to actually look back on it. I didn't need the 50 years to say that it was going to be a bullshit policy, but right. I thought it was important to focus on it. And I think moving forward, you know, coming off the back of what we saw with, you know, OxyContin, Purdue Pharma, all of that, the real gangsters. And I haven't even gotten into prescription drugs and how the issues that has brought about. And again, these are ones that your doctor can fucking write for you.
The legalized drug
dealers. Again, that's, don't get it twisted. That's divided down racial lines as well. That, you know, these are drugs that people, you know, go to their doctor for. They're not, you know, the cheap crack that can be cooked up.
The biggest drug dealers in history, Purdue Pharma, got fined. They didn't go to jail. Mm-hmm. They didn't go to the biggest drug dealers in history. Arguably, like, I don't know. Well, at least in American history, like maybe you could go back to like, I don't know, like Silk Road China, like whoever the guy was, like pumping opium into Europe. Like, you know what I mean? Like, other than that, these people were the biggest drug dealers in the history of our country, and not one of them spent a day in jail. But today, and this is another point I wanted to make, as much as we're kind of talking about this, like this is something coming to its conclusion. No, folks, the war on drugs is still very much alive, especially if you go to the American South. There are states where right now, just under an ounce of weed will land you a year or more in prison. Mm-hmm. A year or more in prison. Okay? And again, we're talking about completely discretionary things where judges can just hit you with the book. If you were like in a circumstance where they didn't like how you got caught with those drugs, or if you ran from police or something like that, like, I don't really like it. What'd you have, an ounce and a half of weed? 2 years.
Right.
Now, that might not sound a lot in the scale of like, you know, what we're talking about, how hard the book used to get thrown at people. But again, when we're talking about this from a human level, like what Patter mentioned at the opening of all this, the disruption that causes, that man losing his job, not being able to support a family if he did before,
spiral,
all for something that's legal in other states. And this is something that, you know, a lot of people harped on Obama about. Obama talked a lot about marijuana legalization. He could deschedule it. It's a Schedule I drug.
Right.
You know, it's a great first step in ending this, actually putting an end to this war on drugs. It's something that he refused to do. He talked about it all the time. He played around the edges. And Biden seems like he's poised to pretty much do the same thing, where he's made statements where he said he thinks Congress needs to handle it. But honestly, he's completely wrong, because we've already seen the evidence of, just like what you mentioned before, Oregon. There's actually a great story of, I'm forgetting his name, but there's a very progressive district attorney out of Philadelphia, super lefty. He basically decriminalized drugs by instructing his
Larry Kudlow.
No, not Kudlow. Kudlow's an economic advisor.
I'm Larry something, I think.
Yeah, I think it might be Larry, but I can't remember. But he all he did was he instructed his lawyers on his team to not prosecute drugs. He said, "Hey, we're going to worry about real crime in Philadelphia." And what happened? Imprisonment fucking went way down. Violent crime went down. There was a ton of positive effects just from that one little thing. Now, he actually just won re-election.
Larry
Krasner.
Yep.
So not only was that extremely popular, it was extremely effective. So I think that these little microcosms of what we're explaining of how that can happen on a state or a local level Granted, Philly's a big city. It's not really too
Right.
local. That's pretty big.
But it reverberates.
You know,
It reverberates.
yeah, it does. And the thing is, it's like that proves like, no, we don't need some overhauling huge fight in Congress where you're going to have all these freaking foghorn leghorn Southern senators going on and on about how, oh, you guys want to legalize cocaine. You know, what's next? Murder? You know,
Yeah.
they're going to do all that dumb shit.
Yeah.
No, Joe Biden can today, just like with student loans, just like with a ton of things within executive purview, he can take marijuana from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 2. That simple movement of what he could instruct the FDA to do would immediately destroy these laws that the states have around. Some of these states still have around marijuana legalization.
Yeah.
In one swipe, one flick of the pen. So again, I just that context is super important because we always talk about this stuff when we start ragging on like, oh, Southern states are so draconian in the way that they prosecute drug crimes. It's like, okay, why are we electing these populist Democrats into the executive that the left values so much that they midterms come around and it's just like, oh, what could we do? But we need to hold the presidency.
Yeah.
What is the point if you aren't going to flick that pen on things that actually
They're
matter?
living their
And
lives on a constant election cycle of needing to stay in power without actually ever getting anything substantial done.
Right.
And
right. It's
and
just
an important.
crazy.
I guess this is kind of the last thing I'll say on it. You look at the weaponization of the war on drugs and the justification that drugs being involved when it comes to law and order. And what I mean by that is, recent example, Breonna Taylor, right? You know, why did they burst through the door? They had a warrant over drug warrant. Even kind of the things that have been, you know, we've seen multiple incidents of people getting taken down or police being heavy-handed. And what are they exercising a warrant on drugs, or did he have drugs in his system? It's now used as a way to explain away the actions of, you know, public servants like police. And we talked about mandatory minimums. We talked about incarceration. All of these things. It's, you know, the war on drugs has given that tool for them to be able to beat society over the head without actually looking at the human behavior and the human cost of all this.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, like I said,
I got one more piece to drop on.
Go
top
ahead.
Of that, what you just said, just to cap it off. And I think that this is important from the article you sent me and other things I pulled up after you sent me this topic, where the important thing that Portugal did wasn't necessarily just changing the law. What they did was they changed the stigma around drugs, because just like what you explained with like Breonna Taylor policing around drugs, like you said, oh, cops murdered someone. Oh, he had drugs in his system. It's used as it's used to put in place of some police interaction that a citizen has. It's used in the stead of violence.
yeah,
Even a person who has anything to do with drugs, whether it be a warrant or they were high, that's used to trigger in your mind like, oh, they're violent,
or yeah,
And
they're
the reason-
bad
and it's
people.
still. And it still works because of this war on drugs that we're talking about. America is still conditioned in that way. That's why it's important what Portugal did, because they destigmatized it by decriminalizing it and made it a public health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. And that's why this is so important. It's not even necessarily just on the incarceration end. It's also important for people who want to leave behind the life of being involved with hard drugs. People don't feel comfortable talking about these things. We're ostracizing them daily for decades now.
Right.
You can't have any healing if you don't allow people to come out of hiding.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big part of it. If that's what your goal is to stop people, tell kids, hey, this is bad or whatever. You know, you remember the fucking stupid DARE campaigns we did?
Yep.
You know, folks who grew up in the 90s here in America. You know, it was all based around fear.
Yeah.
You know, in America I hope that at some point we can finally have the collective cognitive shift into understanding that fear does not work.
Right.
We have decades of evidence. We have previous prohibitions on drugs, alcohol, all this stuff. It doesn't work. You have to leave that behind. You welcome people in.
Right.
Okay, that is the only way out of this, whether you look at it from an incarceration angle or just a public health angle. You know, it's the only way forward, and it's really that simple. anyone who's arguing on the opposite side of this issue as if like, oh, well, drugs are this and that. And I get it. People have a lot of pain around, family members who were addicted to heroin and they died and they want to be mad at the dealer or whatever. But again, it's just like any of these other issues we talk about. Why are you going to get mad at the guy at the lowest rung of the ladder?
Products
like,
of their environment.
Yeah, you got to go after the system.
Right.
The system is what created and nurtured all of these things. That's what we should be working to change.
And from
not looking, it's that.
Yeah,
simple.
and like from an ideology standpoint, right? We've had discussions about how the switch from oil and gas dependency and the subsidies that they get and the money that they get. We've talked about how if that same switch happens into green and renewable energies, how that can invigorate, that part of society and that, tenet of society. It's the same when it comes to criminal justice issues like the war on drugs. If those resources and that amount of focus and energy, and you think of, all the people that are wrapped up in policing this, and without actually ever making it better, you can imagine how the shift in society would be. I mean, like I said, you see it in the numbers in Portugal. So, like I said, from an ideology standpoint, again, this is another way of highlighting that common sense really doesn't prevail here. It doesn't prevail here, and we're starting to see glimpses of it changing. And like I said, there is certain aspects of the quote unquote war on drugs that are changing, but the architecture is still there for it right now. When you talk about police, it's often an important part of it to make sure that they're well equipped to be able to deal with these things. When the reality is, if we had a more health-focused approach to these things and looked at the root cause, I think we'd be in a better standing with the dealing with it than we are, currently today, 50 years on. So yeah, like I said, I wanted to highlight this. I think it's important. I don't think there's many people whose lives haven't been affected by drugs. Know somebody who's passed away from it or been wrapped up in yourself, maybe in your recovery. If any of these things that we spoke about, if you happen to tune in, triggered you, or you want to speak to somebody else, there's plenty of resources out there. I hope that certainly wasn't the purpose of this, but I'm gonna post up some of the articles and some of the statistics and data that are there from reliable sources on what has happened in Portugal and other places of the world. I mean, the research has been done. The facts are in. So again, this is another instance of, and I don't want to beat a dead horse with this, but America's war on drugs, again, it affected the whole world, not just America. And it's another instance of, Jesus, America, you could have done a better job at handling this and set yourselves up to truly be that shining light on the hill when it comes to something like this. And hopefully the better minds that are coming after all this 50 years of bullshit can come up with some better ideas to tackle these issues that are plaguing every single community now. It's no longer just a crack epidemic on MLK Boulevard. It's in the suburbs with Oxycontin. It's fucking heroin is everywhere. It's been everywhere. So that's my take on this main topic. As always, we appreciate those who've been listening. We welcome those who started listening. We'll continue to do this. This is episode 19. On to the big 2-0 next week. Ramon, what do you think?
Coming up. Yeah, I'm pumped up for it, man. I'm ready.
You got anything else for the peeps?
No. Just like echoing a lot of what you said. Just that's why it's important to know your history, folks, because you can't change. I know it's a countrywide thing, but you if you don't understand the errors of the past and you keep excusing
you're
them,
doomed to. What's the quote?
Doomed to repeat it.
Who said that, by the way?
I don't even know. Is that attributed?
It is. It's like there's some famous quote. I'm pretty sure I read it on a white girl's T-shirt one time. It was next to the Live, Laugh, Love.
It's so funny. Yeah, no, yeah, just learn your history, Americans, because like if anybody in the world needs it, it's us.
Don't be playing in the dark.
Nope.
But
stop watching Ben Shapiro and Stephen Crowder. Read the facts.
Yeah, did you like that Charlie Kirk commercial I sent you?
Oh, bro. Oh my god.
Oh, that was some good stuff.
People are just paying these guys so much money. Like it's
yeah,
it's unbelievable.
It was crazy. All right, well,
unbelievable,
guys. If you like the podcast, as always, please like, share, comment, interact with it, and certainly tell other people about it. If you enjoy it, share it with your friends, coworkers, family members. Like I said, we do this out of an affinity for talking about issues that matter and not holding any, pulling any punches or holding our tongues. I think we're pretty pragmatic. We don't, fawn over either side. I do love Bernie though.
Yep.
So yeah,
it's my boy.
Appreciate you. Have a good weekend. And yeah, it's Friday and Saturday, Sunday. You know that song? All right, yo.
What were you singing? I don't know.
You know that song, right? It's the guy. What the original song was? It's Friday and it's Saturday, Sunday. You ever seen that? And then the guy gets out of the car and he's like running along next to it, and his friend's like, "Let's go, let's go."
Oh, you're talking about something new. I was thinking like it's Friday night and I'm feeling right.
Yeah, I mean that is another Friday night song.
I was going back, bro. Yeah. I didn't know what you were
There's
doing.
plenty of Friday songs.
Yeah, there's a million of them.
Shout out Rebecca Black.
It's a universal feeling.
It is. The weekend has landed. All right, that's enough from us before we stop rambling.